What's good, everybody? Welcome back to the Didn't Ask podcast. As always, I'm your host, Jaimon, and today I will be diving back into the world of Reddit to see what the people asked Reddit and didn't ask me. I hope you had a good week. I'm doing fine, as always. Not much going on. Luckily, got my first vaccine appointment planned for in 2 weeks. So we're getting back into the groove, you know what I mean? We're getting back to normal. Hopefully we're close to everything opening up. We're getting closer and closer. The theaters are open. I've not gone yet because there are not really many movies I want to see. But next week we're gonna get In the Heights, and I'm super excited for that. And then we're gonna have Fast and Furious. Man, and then we're gonna have Black Widow. So everything is popping off. I'm very excited to go back to theaters and see all the movies that have been planned for last year, or maybe even before that, and then got delayed into this year. But this is not where this podcast is about. This podcast is about all the questions that the people asked to Reddit. So let's jump right into the first question of today. And this one was asked by user change-of-ice. And they ask, if you were given $50,000 so you could chase your dream, what dream would you chase? And I've said this on Twitter last week because it was E3. So I was like, well, there is this perfect moment for me to put my dream out into the universe. And that is that I really would love to be a voice actor for games and TV shows and movies and you name it. I would love to do it, and it's something that I've wanted to do for such a long time, but I've just no idea how to get started. So with the $50,000, that would basically, guarantee the fact that I just don't have to do anything, and that also gives me the opportunity to buy all the material and set up stuff to make myself a recording studio so I could start selling my voice work for people and going on auditions and stuff like that. So that would be one of the dreams that I would chase if I had the $50,000. And like I said, I know I could probably do it right now, but theoretically speaking, I would like to get some new audio equipment, isolate my room, make a cool home studio to see actually how good my voice would sound in a controlled environment. Because right now I'm doing this podcast and it's cool, you know what I mean? My mic is good. I know how to edit a little bit, so the audio sounds fine. But still, sometimes if you hear cars driving around in the back, that's something I just don't know how to do. So getting a better controlled environment and better equipment should, theoretically speaking, help me get a more professional sound to my tapes. And like I said, it would just be going after auditions, and I don't even know how to fucking do that shit, because I've looked at that, because I really want to do this. I really want to do some voice acting for, like I said, games and TV shows, because that's something that I've always had an admiration for. I've always looked up to guys like Troy Baker and Nolan North, and gals like Ashley Johnson and Laura Bailey, who are basically in everything you can imagine, similar to Ashley Birch. They're in basically every TV show, every movie, every video game that is out there. You can probably hear them or find them in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes it's like a big character, like, I don't know, Troy Baker does the voice of Loki in all the animated Marvel cartoons. But sometimes it's a smaller character, and sometimes you just hear them in the background. You hear a Nolan North in a movie. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, is that I'm doing a TMNT rewatch together with the Kind of Funny guys who are going through it, and then I always try to keep up and watch the movies basically with them, so you can be part of the conversation. It's super fun to go into the Kind of Funny Facebook group and talk to other fans of Kind of Funny what they thought about the movies. But last week we watched the The 2007, yeah, the 2007 TMNT movie, the animated movie, and Nolan North is the voice of Raphael, and that's so cool because Nolan North, like I said, is a prolific voice actor, but especially for that movie, where they have people like Chris Evans and Sarah Michelle Gellar as voices in them, it's kind of weird to have Nolan North, the prolific voice of Nathan Drake, be in that movie. But it was so cool to hear him, and he does a very good Raph, so I was very excited. So that's something that I would do. Going back to the question asked by Chains of Ice, if you were given $50,000 so you could chase your dream, what dream would you chase? And that is becoming a voice actor. That's something I would love to do, and I've said this on Twitter, and I've spoken out this many a times, and I've tried to help my friends that needed voice actors, and I did some voiceover for some projects in school when I was back in college. And I'm doing this podcast now. I love talking, I love changing my voice and doing stuff like that. So I would love to use the $50,000 to invest in new equipment, making sure that my voice and audio sounds perfect in a controlled environment, so I can do auditions from home and maybe even do some jobs from home. So Chains of Ice, I hope that answers your question. Thank you for your question. Going on to the second question of Ask Reddit for today. And this one was asked by user Heartbreak Nostalgia. And they ask, was there ever a time you're thankful the pandemic happened? What was the reason? And it's of course like a weird question kinda, because you're saying like, oh, I'm thankful for the pandemic. But the pandemic was it still is a shitty time, but it of course was way worse when we didn't have vaccines and we didn't really know how to get control of this weird virus that's going on right now. But the thing that basically made me thankful for the pandemic is that the way you think about life really changed to me, in a sense that I was always very close with my grandparents, and I would visit them on a monthly basis or whatever, but barely, talk to them in between those times. So with the pandemic, I actually started getting into a habit of calling my grandparents every week to make sure that everything is in order, to ask if they needed something, if I could do something for them, if I could help them with something, to just make sure that they were good. Because the contrary of that is that the pandemic basically, especially the earlier stages, made me miss my grandparents in a way that I couldn't visit them. So I normally would go at least once a month to visit my grandparents. And sometimes, depending on which grandparent, sometimes it would be more or less or whatever. But I would try and go there every month. So I'd see them at least, a couple of times a year. But because of the pandemic, I wasn't really allowed to go there because, like I said, we didn't know how to control the virus, and we didn't know what was right, what was wrong, what we could do, how much distance you should keep, should we take on masks, should we not, you name it. So that actually fell away, and therefore I started calling them, and then I was like, I'm just going to call them every month to just make sure that they are okay and they know that I am okay and I'm doing well. So that is something that I'm kind of thankful for, that I basically, reinvested my time into the fact that, I have grandparents, and luckily that I have all of them, even though I lost my grandma to COVID, sadly. But yeah, before she went, I talked to her every week, and I visited her like every 2 weeks maybe, to just make sure that everything was in order and that she was doing okay, and that she had groceries in the house and stuff like that, because she couldn't do it herself. So going back to the question asked by user Heartbreak Nostalgia, Was there ever a time you were thankful the pandemic happened? What was the reason? And like I said, not necessarily thankful. Thankful is a big word, but it made me realize, what was important in life, and it made me reinvest the time that I had into my grandparents and making sure that I at least called them every week. Just make sure that I had like 30 minutes in the day to call my grandparents and ask them if everything was all right, if I could help them with everything, if they needed some groceries, so I would be able to get that for them. Yeah, and that actually helped. The pandemic was very helpful for that. So thank you, Heartbreak Nostalgia, for your question. Going to the third question of today. If you came with a disclaimer, what would it say? And this is a funny question, especially after the bit of a downer question that we had before this, and this one was asked by user Redcast, and that's spelled Redkas. And my answer to this question would be, my disclaimer would probably say, what would it say? I think the most logical thing for it to say would be, disclaimer, Jaimon has a really hard time saying no. Please don't abuse this situation, because people that know me know that I have a really hard time saying no. So if somebody asks me a question, I'm too quote unquote polite, even though that sounds very cocky. But I'm too polite to say no or deny something, which sometimes puts me in some hard situations because I'm very, like I said, it's really hard for me to say no. So sometimes I plan my day so tightly that I barely have time, to get from one place to another to do the job I have supposed to do. So I think that would be my disclaimer. Just something that goes like, Jaimon has a really hard time saying no. Please don't abuse this situation. Because, like I said, it's really hard for me to say no. And, that's really hard for me. And I had this at the end of last year when I did an internship at a PR company. And they kept asking me questions. And I was basically the only intern that was connected to that part of the team. And I was like, oh, I can do that. Okay, I can do that. I can do that. I can do that. And then I was doing working the whole day, not even 5 minutes of, time for myself, or barely had any time to go to the bathroom. So things like that were a bit hard. But luckily, that also gave me the opportunity to learn how to say no. Because that's very important. And I feel like everybody needs to make sure that they learn that skill, basically, that they learn that they can say no, and that it's not necessarily a bad thing to say no, especially when you're in, pressureful situations where you have to do certain jobs, and sometimes it's better to just say no so that they can search for a different solution to the problem than you saying yes and you barely being of any help. So that would be the answer to your question, Redcast. If you came with a disclaimer, what would it say? It would say, disclaimer, Jaimon has a hard time saying no. Please don't abuse this power or this situation. Because I think that would actually help me very much. Because, like I said, it's just really hard for me to say no, and if somebody asks me anything, I would probably say yes, even though I know that I have other things I need to do too. So yeah, thank you for your question. Going on to the next question of today, and this one was asked by Potato Lawrence 2000, and they ask, what video game is actually extremely depressing to play? And the answer to this question is really simple. Because, the only answer that came to mind, and very quickly, was The Last of Us Part 2. The Last of Us Part 1 is actually a way more hopeful situation. It's more of a story about hope, in the sense that, you are told about this group of fireflies, as they call them, that may be able to save the world from the cordyceps virus. And you as Joel escort Ellie to the firefly compound, and you try to save the world in a sense, but along the way you form a bond with Ellie, and it goes to like a father-daughter bond, and it's very cool, and it's, like I said, very hopeful. But in The Last of Us Part 2, that is the complete opposite. Even though the main themes of both games are very similar, because they're both about love, and that's what The Last of Us is about. It's about love, but it's also about how far you will go for your love and how far you will go to prove your love. And so, spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2. If you've not played it, skip ahead for like 30 seconds starting now. In The Last of Us Part 2, you play as Ellie, and she loses Joel in the first couple of hours after you're playing, and it's heartbreaking, and it puts on this catalyst of you wanting revenge, and it's super depressing. Just the tale of her wanting revenge and trying to find her way through life without the guiding light in her life. That is harsh. Welcome back, listeners that don't want to hear spoilers. So yeah, with that, I would say that the game is super depressing, and the gameplay actually backs the story up so well that it's such a great game that puts story and gameplay hand in hand and makes sure that you feel the story from many different viewpoints. And it's such a cool world to be in, and I've played the game like basically 2 times all the way through, because I played it once to just experience it, and a second time to get the platinum trophy. And even doing it the second time on a way easier difficulty, it gave you the feeling of loss and a feeling of hopelessness that the first game did give you at certain points, but still had a undertone of hope. And I feel like The Last of Us Part 2 has that way less. So yeah, going back to the question asked by user Potato Lorenz 2000, what video game is actually extremely depressing to play? And that is The Last of Us Part 2 for me. Even though it's one of the best games I've ever played, and it's one of the best games ever made, and there are so many aspects of the game that really make you think about your life and what you're doing, and seeing how that world ended up from a similar pandemic that we are experiencing now is kind of scary as well. But luckily, it seems that we found a cure, and they didn't. So yeah, The Last of Us Part 2 is probably one of the most depressing games ever made, but still at the same time one of the best games ever made. So Potato Lorenz 2000, thank you for your question. Moving on to the final question of the Ask Reddit for today. And this one was asked by user Muncie, and they ask, for $5,000, you have to watch the same movie on repeat for 48 hours. What movie are you picking? And this is a fun question, because I see the top answer of this, and it says it was answered by the user D_Lex_show, and they said, $5,000? I think you underestimate how broke I am. Throw on any movie. And it's one of these things that, it's a fun question, because you have to think of the fact that 48 hours watching the same movie is gonna be very boring very quickly. So that is something that you need to, keep a tab on. And you want something that is, funny, but maybe not too funny, because if you have the same joke 48 hours after each other, you're gonna be kind of sick and tired of that. And I'm also thinking about this tactically, because you want to pick a movie that is long but not necessarily that long. In the sense that if you have to watch a 2-hour movie, that's of course you've watched the movie 24 times. But if you watch a movie that's an hour and a half, that number of times you've seen the movie is going to increase, of course. So I'm thinking about this very tactically, and I'm thinking about my style of movie. And I think I'm going to have to go with Hamilton, the movie. So it's of course the film adaptation of the stage play. So it's kind of a musical, but also it technically is a movie. It's nominated, I believe, for picture, and it's available on Disney Plus. So I'm just gonna say Hamilton, because again, coming back to the theory I had, Hamilton is 2.5 hours, I think, from the top of my head, maybe even 3. Yeah, so it's like 2.5 hours, maybe even 3. So it's quite long, but not necessarily that long. I feel like it has a perfect balance of like having the music makes the movie interesting, but there is also some more, like mellow out parts where there's more talking. You know what I mean? So I feel like Hamilton is a good pick for me, because I love musicals, and I've said this a couple of times on the show already. It's such a good movie as well. Like the way that they adopted the stage play to be a movie is so cool. And like I said, the movie is a little longer than a quote unquote normal movie is, even though that's nowadays it's not necessarily true. But I feel like having the music be in there, because of course it's a musical, makes it so that the movie itself is a little more interesting. And even when you know everything that's going to happen, because I've seen Hamilton the movie like a couple of times already, and I've listened to the album many times too. So even though you know what's going to happen, it still is fun because you can sing along with every song and number. And some of these songs are really fast and the lyrics come at you really quickly. So I think that's also like a fun way to, get in the groove and try to teach yourself how to do those tunes. So user Muncie, that's spelled MUNTSZY, and they ask, for $5,000 you have to watch the same movie on repeat for 48 hours. What movie are you picking? And I'm gonna go for Hamilton, the stage play production movie that is on Disney Plus, because I think that is the perfect combination of a drama, comedy, having it be a musical, and also it being a little longer, so you have a little bit more time to forget the beginning, and then once you get there you probably forgot the ending again. And again, like I said, also I think it's really fun for it to have music, and so you can teach yourself the songs and you can sing along to keep the fun going. And now going to the final question of today, and this one coming from one of my favorite subreddits, Am I the Asshole? And this one was asked by user NT Going, and they ask, am I the asshole for refusing to lie to my friend's parents? A couple of months ago, my friend Jay and I, both female, 28, took a short vacation together to California. We had a really good time. I'm an artist, and in this past weekend, I had a small showing at an open-air gallery in our city. I invited Jay, and she asked if her parents could come along, as they'd be visiting her for Father's Day. Of course, I said they would be welcome to. The day before, Jay mentioned to me that her parents did not know about the trip she'd taken with me to California, and that I should therefore not mention anything about it, as it would cause problems for her if they knew. I asked why, and she said it was very complicated and involved family issues, but wouldn't elaborate. I told Jay that I couldn't promise this. I value the truth very highly and I get extremely anxious when asked to lie or hide things, as it happened to me in the past in relationships and really damaged my trust in other people. Furthermore, now that I knew I'd need to conceal this information, I told Jay it wasn't fair to me and it was placing an undue burden on me. Jay got extremely angry with me and immediately cancelled our plans. I think she told her parents we'd had a falling out. I'm upset because Jay is a really good friend, but I don't know how to feel now that she asked me to be complicit in her lie. My BF told me I'm being too oversensitive. Am I the asshole? And this is a interesting one because I don't necessarily think you're the asshole, but I think that you made a mountain out of a molehill. Your friend just asked you not to mention it. You didn't have to say anything about it. The parents are there to see your art. So as long as you just keep the conversation on the art, there is no reason for you to mention the trip to California. So I think that the least you could do was just go there and, talk to them and just make sure that everything is fine and in order. Because if this is so important to your friend, there must be some reason for it. And even though she didn't really want to say something, there is something up in this situation. So the least you could do as a friend was to just be like, okay, I understand you don't want to have any issues with your parents. It's fine. We just talk about something else. And I think that your friend being your friend and her not wanting you to talk about the California trip would do everything in her power to not let the conversation go on to that topic. Now, I went to the comments on this question and some people are pointing out some very interesting facts about this. So did user Glakeson Flux. And they said, did it ever occur to you that if an adult has asked you to lie about such an innocuous thing to her parents, that there might be some form of abuse going on? Especially after the fact that she canceled plans immediately when you refused to talk about it. Which isn't a lie, by the way. She was just asking you not to mention something, which I highly doubt would come up with people I'm assuming you don't know. You're the asshole. So he clarified that they are the asshole, the original poster is the asshole, but again, it's a little harder to say, but I feel like, yeah, you're a bit of a, like your boyfriend said, you're little bit of an oversensitive feller. But yeah, so I agree with what Glakeson Flux said. It's such an interesting thing to think about that, yeah, maybe something is wrong in her domestic life. Maybe her parents, I don't know, don't have that much money and she has to pay for her parents and therefore doesn't have money left. So she saved some money so she could go on this trip. And now that they know that she could go on the trip, that the parents are getting mad and abusive to her. And abusive can, of course, come in different forms and could be physical, but also, emotional. So I would say anti-going. Am I the asshole for refusing to lie to my friend's parents? And I would say that, yeah, you're a little bit of an asshole. Again, I don't really want to say that you're the asshole because, of course, you have feelings too and there are certain things, but this was not necessarily, you didn't have to lie. You didn't have to blatantly lie. Just, be a good friend. And if your friend said, hey, I would love to visit you at an open air gallery, just don't mention this to my parents, and you go, oh man, I cannot do that, then I would say that, yeah, you're a little bit of an oversensitive person, and that, is a little bit of a dick move. So thank you for your question. I hope I answered it for you. But yeah, there is something going on with your friend, so maybe you should check on your friend and to see what is really going on in her home, and ask what her relationship is with her parents. But thank you for your question anyway. And this was it for the 15th episode of the Didn't Ask podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back next week. In the meantime, you can go back to the old episodes of the Didn't Ask podcast. You can find them on any of your favorite podcast services. To find the links to any of the services, you can go to anchor.fm/didn't-ask-pod, and you will be able to find all the links to different services, whatever. You can also just look for the Didn't Ask podcast in your favorite podcast app, and you should find it very quickly. You can also see what I'm watching using Tracked.tv. That link would be in the show description, similar to the Didn't Ask link. And if you want to ask me a question, you can also go to the anchor.fm/didn't-ask-pod, and you can see like a very cool button there that says messages. And if you press that, you're able to record a message for me so I can play that in this podcast, and you can hear your question live on air, and I will answer that live on air. I hope you have a good week, and I'll see you back next time. Goodbye.